Brian stood at the edge of the forest, the morning sun casting long shadows through the trees. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Just as he was about to step into the forest, a firm hand grabbed his shoulder. "Hold on there, son," a stern voice said. Brian turned to see a police officer, his expression stern. "What do you think you're doing?" the officer asked. "I'm just going to take a look around," Brian replied, trying to sound casual. "I won't go far." The officer shook his head. "Not happening. This forest is off limits. Too many people have gone missing or come back with crazy stories. It's dangerous." Brian frowned. "But that's exactly why I'm here. I'm investigating those stories. There's something I need to see for myself." The officer crossed his arms. "Listen, I don't know what you think you're going to find, but I'm telling you it's not safe. The stories about that girl and her spider are just that, stories." Brian's frustration bubbled up. "You don't understand. I talked to an old man who barely survived an encounter with her. There are people who believe these stories because they've experienced them. I have to know the truth." The officer's eyes narrowed. "You think you know better than the authorities? We've had to pull too many bodies out of these woods. I'm not letting you add to that number." Brian took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'm not asking for your permission. I just want to look around the edges, not go deep into the forest." The officer sighed, his expression softening slightly. "Look, kid, I get it. You're curious, but curiosity can get you killed. There's a reason we don't let people in there anymore. It's for your own safety." Brian's eyes were resolute. "I appreciate your concern, but I just want to look around the edges to see if I can hear or see anything." The officer looked at him for a long moment before finally sighing deeply. "All right, but I'm coming with you, and we stay on the path. No wandering off. Got it?" Brian nodded, relief washing over him. "Got it. Thank you." The officer turned and started walking, gesturing for Brian to follow. "Just remember, if anything feels off, we turn back immediately. No arguments." As they walked along the edge of the forest, Brian couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and dread. The stories he had heard were terrifying, but he needed to see something for himself to truly understand. "So, what exactly are you hoping to find?" the officer asked, breaking the silence. "Anything that can give us more information about Lana and Shimu," Brian replied. "Even the smallest clue could help." The officer grunted. "Well, I hope you find what you're looking for. But remember, this place has a way of playing tricks on your mind. Don't let your guard down." Brian and the police officer walked deeper into the forest, the towering trees casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the morning light. As they walked, the officer glanced at Brian, curiosity in his eyes. "So, tell me more about this girl and her spider," the officer said, his tone skeptical but curious. Brian sighed, knowing the story sounded outlandish. "Her name is Lana. From what we've gathered, she was once a normal girl, but something happened that changed her. Now she roams this forest with her spider, Shimu. They say she preys on anyone who enters her territory." The officer raised an eyebrow. "And Shimu? What's his deal?" "Shimu was a Christmas gift when Lana was still normal," Brian explained. "He's her only friend, the only thing she cares about. But he's also dangerous. People who've seen them say that he's not a normal spider." The officer snorted. "You don't say. And these people, how many of them are reliable sources?" Brian shrugged. "It's hard to tell. Some stories are clearly exaggerated or fake. But there are a few, like the old man I spoke to, who seemed genuinely terrified. He barely survived an encounter with her." They continued walking in silence for a while, the forest around them eerily quiet. Brian felt a shiver run down his spine as he glanced around, the feeling of being watched growing stronger. "Do you feel that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The officer nodded, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. "Yeah, feels like we're not alone. But there's no sign of anyone." Brian scanned the trees, his heart pounding. "It's just fog and the usual forest sounds, but I can't shake the feeling that something's out there." The officer frowned, his eyes narrowing. "Let's not push our luck. We should head back." Brian nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, you're right. No point in risking it." They turned back, walking quickly but cautiously. The feeling of being watched persisted. and Brian couldn't help but glance over his shoulder every few steps. As they neared the edge of the forest, the officer broke the silence. "You know, kid, I've been on the force for a long time, seen a lot of strange things, but this is something else." Brian nodded, his mind racing. "Thanks for coming with me. I know it sounds crazy, but I had to see for myself." The officer gave him a tight smile. "Just be careful. This place, it has a way of getting under your skin." They reached the end of the forest, and the officer patted Brian on the shoulder. "Stay safe, all right?" "You too," Brian replied. "And thanks again." The officer nodded and walked back towards the village. Brian stood there for a moment, the forest behind him and the village ahead. Just as he was about to head back, he heard a faint giggle and a soft hum carried on the wind. He turned, staring into the foggy forest, but saw nothing. Shaking his head, he took a deep breath and walked back towards the village, the eerie sound echoing in his mind.